Hi, I'm Carolyn, a compulsive overeater. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet, write it down, give it to my sponsor. I don't eat in between no matter what. And abstinence is the most important thing in my life without exception. And my abstinence date is April 26, 1996. I haven't had to eat over anything for over 26 years, and that is really big for me because I ate over everything. And uh, I want to let anyone know that no matter what you do when you're not abstinent, you don't have to do it when you're abstinent. And I'm an example of that because as a young child, I suffered abandonment issues. I saw my mother being beaten under a table, and I resolved myself because I felt helpless that I was not going to let anyone hurt her again. And I developed this need to control and a need to possess. And I had a lot of fear, a lot of anger. And these things would work their way into the food because I always loved food and it was never enough. It was never enough. I always had my hand out. But I was a little child and active, and I was not yet in the disease, but it was apparent to me now, as I know about abstinence, that I had the makings of this disease. And so I just want to say that this meeting is called the Sunlight of the Spirit. And because I have been working my program all these years, I feel like there are many times when I'm in the sunlight of the Spirit. Because for me, that means being free of resentments, learning to get free of resentments, get out of my own way. Just get out of my own way, because I got in my own way, and I always felt self-righteous anger and self-importance, and I had no idea that I was suffering from that. I would learn it in the gray sheet rooms. So I always loved food. I hated dieting, and my mother was in control of the food. And I couldn't take anything out of the refrigerator, but I did try to eat other ways. I tried to find the key to the bar. I tried to take food from my father's supper plate. And when I got a little more control, I would do some things that would surprise me, like at an aunt's house in the country. It was at night. Everyone was asleep. And I went in and made this huge, huge thing piled up with the fruit in between. And she never said anything. And she was obese, but she never said anything. But when I was engaged, when I was actually going off to my honeymoon, she warned me gently, you have to watch it because you could gain weight. And I actually gained a lot of weight and had trouble getting into my clothes after the honeymoon. I got married in 1969 to a compulsive overeater. I didn't realize he was a compulsive overeater, but we shared in the disease. I hated dieting. I remember having the measles when I was 10. And what I remember about it is that I lost 10 pounds. And I remember girls talking about diets, and I just excluded myself from that. I didn't say anything. I always felt inadequate and less than, and couldn't talk about a lot of things. I couldn't talk about things even to my own doctor. He said he never met a teenager like me because there were some problems in the family. When my mother remarried, I was adjusting to a new father and a new authoritarian figure, which I didn't like. I don't like authority figures. And so he said, I never met anyone like you who couldn't talk about what was going on. So this healing process is so important. I learned to heal in the rooms. But first I had to find out that I really was a compulsive overeater. And it was in stages that I discovered this, because my husband wanted us to go to diet control. And I went to diet control, written down here in my book, in February of 1974. And I weighed 174 pounds. And in 3 months, very familiar word, 3 months, we do things for 90 days. But anyway, somehow in 3 months, I had had enough. I was down to 146. That was not going to be my lowest, and it was not going to be my highest. I have a progressive disease, and when I put that food into my body, it sets up a craving. Since I'm abstinent, I have not had a craving for food, because technically a craving is when you put that substance into your body and it sets the allergy up going. It sets it all going. And I haven't had to white knuckle it either, because I don't talk to the food. And I learned that after my many experiences in OA. So how did I get to OA? Because I had given birth in 1975. I was 175 pounds. I had an average baby, and I couldn't stop eating. And I didn't know what to do about it. I would eat the stuff that was meant for the guests and try to replace it. And I was feeling hopeless and helpless, hopeless. And my husband said to me, because he wasn't always nice, maybe you were meant to be fat. Now, if an angel didn't come into my life, I could have exploded, just exploded. But my mother's friend told her about OA, and my mother said, because I didn't know how to drive, and I was afraid of driving, even at the age of 28, afraid of driving. My two sisters learned. I had a lot of fears. I had a lot of anger issues. So I got to that meeting. My mother watched my baby, and I began to live. And after 1 year, I went down to like what I probably weigh now, but I was thin. I looked thin. My body has changed. But I know I weighed less than 113. I'm 113 today. I'm 5'1". So I got down to that weight. It took me a year, and I was feeling good. I had all these fears and angers. They didn't really go away, but I was starting to feel life again, and buying clothes and living. I was a teacher, and I needed to go back to teaching after my husband lost his job. And I've stayed with that profession for over close to 30 years. So, but 4 years into OA and staying about that weight, I began to do something that I know I do not do today, and I didn't do when I first started GreySheet, and that was talking to the food. And it tells us in 24 Hours a Day, I love that book, December 4th. If we allow a compulsive eating thought to lodge in our minds for any length of time, we are in danger of having a slip or a relapse. Therefore, we must dispel such thoughts at once by refusing their admittance and by immediately putting constructive thoughts in their place. So I learned in GreySheet what I couldn't do that I did then. I talked to the food back then. I imagined what I would eat before I went to bed. I was setting myself up unaware, because I went through life with my eyes closed. In GreySheet, we go through our life with our eyes wide open. We are responsible for what we put in our mouths. No one else can do that to us. No husband, no daughter, no situation, no place can make us eat. We do that. But I didn't understand that then. So I set myself up. And when I experienced self-pity, when my husband had to go into the hospital with pneumonia, and I was a young mother, and by that time I had learned how to drive, I set myself up for that binge, and I left OA. 6 months later, I said I would come back when I lost the weight. I was always saying that, but I couldn't lose the weight, and I crawled back, and I did that 4 times at least. But the first time I came back, there was no more Grey Sheet because I started on the original Grey Sheet. There was no more Grey Sheet. And now now was I going to do? Well, I picked the orange sheet because that allowed a half a carb. It didn't matter whatever they said before. That wasn't on my mind. The blue sheet had no carbs, but I wasn't going to pick the blue sheet. So here I was, my head not in the right direction. And so that would go on until, and then when I would lose my abstinence in OA, I would do things like go to the store and look for food look for bags that were opened. I honored myself, that I only took from open bags, even if it was a tiny bit open. And I stuffed my pockets and I ate as much as I could. And when I realized that maybe someone is looking at me in those mirrors in the store, I left the store, eating on the way out, eating home, climbing up the stairs and trying to hide the food. And then my husband rapping on the door, what are you doing in there? What are you doing in there? And it was always the same miserable story. And so when I reached my bottom in 1996, it took me 3 months actually when I found out that there really was a Grey Sheet, because finally I stayed the last time in OA. I stayed and someone came to that meeting and they said there really was a Grey Sheet. And 3 months though it took, with more binging, until I was finally at my bottom, lying in bed in a fetal position, having once more eaten everything out of that microwavable box. And I couldn't live with it, and I couldn't live without it. And the perennial cry of the compulsive eater, how did I do it again? How did I do it again? The self-pity, the loathing, the feeling like dying. And then I remembered this meeting, and I remembered that in the very beginning of Grey Sheet, it worked for me. There was just that little voice. And the next morning, I went to that meeting. I obviously, in my blankness, looked up where the meeting was, because I also was afraid of driving to places I didn't know. And then my life began. So I learned tools, how to cope with life. And today I feel like I have the tools that help me cope with life. I learned to change negative things into positive things. I learned to find a God that doesn't want me to hurt myself around food, a God that wants me to use his strength, a God that never has given me more than I can handle. I learned to become a person to listen to tapes. Someone in the very beginning said, here, listen to these tapes, AA tapes. And I had to give them back to her. And then at my first roundup, there was the year before the roundup in New York. The theme was, I found out, healing the wreckage of the past. And I said, this is where I need to be. This is where I need to be. And so I learned how to solutionize and stay in the solution, not the problem. The food is the problem. I learned how to change negative things, negative thoughts into positive thoughts. I learned about taking backup. I learned how to bear discomfort, that we can bear discomfort and comfort will come. And I learned how to change all my thinking about Grey Sheet. That Grey Sheet is the easier, softer way. That whatever I need to do for Grey Sheet is a small price to pay. And so I thank you for letting me speak, and we don't eat no matter what.